Thank you for coming. Welcome. Welcome to our first Writer Speak event of spring semester. We're so thrilled to have Roger Rosenblatt read from his new book tonight. And Flo will introduce him in a minute, but first I have a few announcements. We were just at AWP and we made quite the big splash with our cocktail party honoring Roger's new book and also Luann. We were celebrating the 5th year of the Southampton Review, so here's Luann. And we had a very popular bragging rights event where Julie Sheehan and Matt Clam and our award-winning, or not award-winning, but best-selling novelist, graduate Helen Simonson joined Roger. And Roger read from this book. It was a really well-attended event and people were very enthusiastic. So we're thrilled with our presence at AWP this year. We also met with Penn USA to begin a Writers in the School program with them where our students will start to file into helping bring literacy and different writing experiences into the local high school. So we're thrilled about that. Come on in. Also, this semester our classes were so waitlisted that we added a new class, a playwriting class taught by Bill Burford, and some of his students are here and they all keep telling me about how much they love that class and that there's these hugs in the lounge afterwards. They're so happy. And this semester, our Manhattan students, we've been here long enough so that we're having our first thesis. People coming to the end of their thesis and finishing their theses. So we're pleased to have many people in their last semester, and we're going to have a final reading May 16th, where a lot of our students will be reading publicly. So I hope you come to that. Also something new, this just happened Friday and today, Carla Cagliotti, who just got her doctorate, orchestrated a relationship with St. John's University. So now the students studying here will be able to learn how to teach freshman comp at the university level and attend classes at St. John's. So we're very excited about that. Bob Reeves wanted me to mention, there's a lot of announcements tonight, so just bear with me. Bob Reeves wanted me to mention that there have been some initial discussions on community building and grad student involvement in the program and with the alumni, the relationship between Southampton and main campus. And he wanted me to assure you that Manhattan will be very much a part of those conversations and probably the next meeting will be out here. And now, hot off the presses, our summer workshop leaders, one of which we have in the audience, so we're very excited about that. These are the final people who are going to be running the workshops this summer. So Meg Wolitzer is going to be teaching the novel, Melissa Bank, general fiction. Frederick Tutton will be teaching short story. He just read in Southampton. Roger will be teaching memoir. Let's hear from Roger. David Rakoff, who taught personal essay here fall semester or spring semester last year, will be teaching personal essay in the summer. Matt Clam will be back teaching creative nonfiction. We have a very strong poetry department with Billy Collins and Julie Sheehan and also Mark Doty this year. And then in playwriting, Robbie Bates, Marcia Norman, and Emily Mann. So that's also very strong showing for us. Now I'll introduce Roger's introducer. Flo Davies is writing a wonderful book that has a lot of sass and a lot of pluck and a lot of attitude, so much so that I think Roger's hoping she'll insult him through her whole introduction. We'll soon find out. Please welcome Flo Davies.
Hello. In our creative nonfiction class last fall, Roger told the 12 of us to imagine what we know as a way into the stories that we were trying to tell. So I imagine today that Roger despises all of you and wants you to buy his book. That aside, unless it moves the human heart, can only come from a person like Roger. He spent the majority of his career as a champion of student writing, as well as a savant with his own publications. His memoir, Making Toast, replete with touching lyricism and exquisite scarcity, not only moves us, but also validates that Roger is more than capable of practicing what he extols. I suppose that Unless It Moves the Human Heart fascinates me not only because of its voyeuristic qualities, as I'm well acquainted with several of the students from his 2008 Writing Everything class. In fact, it was my friend Diana Gallagher who suggested I take a course with him. Roger is epic, she told me. How could I deny myself that dance? And so I went on to not take one, but 2 courses with Roger. Only for a great man would I go through such abuse. Having read this book, I can say that the undeniable quality comes from its unique treatise on writing. In the chapter marked "My Story, Myself," Roger says, "Writing is the cure for the disease of living. Doing it may sometimes feel like an escape from the world, but at its best moments, it is an act of rescue. Each of you has its own way of seeing into suffering and error, but you share the desire to save the world from its blights by going deeper into them until they lie exposed. You show up the imperfections of living for what they are. You hope to write them out of existence." He goes on to say that Diana makes fun of him for saying this, as would I. Only Roger could inspire this type of total disregard for authority, but only he could think us capable of doing this prodigious task, to find the souls in our pieces, to sharpen, to wit, to think of ourselves as writers or else. Roger demands gumption on the page. He demands gumption in our lives. And that said, let's get the old man up here before he falls asleep. Roger
What a disgusting woman. It's very easy to be proud of this group and to work with them. It's a joy to watch new writers, emerging writers, just blossom before your eyes, and cheer them on. Many of them here now makes all of us teachers extremely proud and lucky. I'm going to talk a little about, or maybe I guess a little more about Unless It Moves the Human Heart, and then because I have a very limited capacity for interesting myself, I'm going to read from something that I've never read from before. It's a long essay that's coming out as a little book next year, and I just wanted to do it, so I'll ask your indulgence. Unless It Moves the Human Heart, a book about writing. You know that a writer has come to the end of his rope when he writes a book about writing, so it's a pathetic act that I bring before you. Reinforced by my 9-year-old granddaughter Jessica, I sometimes teach, as Ginny does, in our grandchildren's school, and Jessie introduced me to her 4th grade class recently thus. This is my grandfather, Boppo, with my parental name. This is my grandfather, Boppo. He lives in the basement and does nothing. Couldn't fault her for accuracy. And one of my friends said, well, what's this latest book about? I told him, he says, you do nothing now, you're teaching other people how to do it, I guess, or not to do it. Anyway, Unless It Moves the Human Heart is about the teaching of writing, and I was lucky enough to have I could have chosen any one of my classes. Magdalene, for some mean-spirited reason, is still sore that I didn't choose her class to do it. So? She said, I could have been in that book. I could have been a star. Well, could have. But I could have done that with any of the classes.
There's times when you say that, I'm going to leap up and say, that's so not true.
That's so not true, says Madeline, still bitter, still awful to watch a bitter woman, really. And this one had the advantage, as does the class I'm teaching here now, in just covering several genres. So the book begins, and some of you have heard me say so before, with a discussion of the importance of story. And I talk about the centrality of stories in our lives, in our being, that we think of ourselves, that is, people think of themselves as a rational species, but that's kind of an habitually shared joke. But a narrative species, that's something else. We are born to tell stories. It is what we naturally do. The Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto in the last days of it knew perfectly well what their fate was. They had seen their family and friends hauled off to the extermination camps. They themselves were dying of diphtheria and starvation, and yet they would take pieces of paper and write autobiographical fragments on them, poems, roll them into little scrolls and stick them in the Warsaw Ghetto walls. Why? They knew perfectly well that if these scraps of paper were ever discovered, they would be by the so-called master race, who would deride them and toss them away. So it seemed fruitless, but they could not help themselves because they had a tale to tell. They had to tell a tale. In The Perfect Storm, the book, not the movie stank, but in the beginning of the book, there's the captain of a mackerel schooner going down. There's no question that the ship is going down in a hurricane, or I guess a typhoon. And yet, as he goes down, holding a lantern in one hand, he manages to send a message, put it in a bottle, and send it off, which is what we all do. We send off our little messages in the bottle. You remember the Russian submariners some years ago sending their messages up. You could almost see see those messages floating up. The desire to tell the story, to tell the tale. The messenger in Job says at the end of Job's horrific story, "And I only alone am left to tell thee. And I only alone am left to tell thee." As I tell my students, you don't really need alone and only in the same sentence, but it's fun to add in the Bible. Melville takes practically the same sentence at the end of Moby Dick with Ishmael floating on the coffin and says, "And I alone am left to tell the tale." The telling of the tale. The telling of the tale is what we were made to do, what we were born to do, and you see it in all the activities of our lives. What is a jury trial but a competition of stories? The only reason O.J. got off was that the jury liked Johnny Cochran's story better than they liked Marcia Clark's. Luckily, there is justice in the world, and O.J. is now serving time for stealing his own shirt. In medicine, I don't make this stuff up, I just report it. In medicine, there is a branch of medicine called narrative medicine that trusts the patient to tell the story of the illness, the history, the brief history of the illness. I felt this way 2 weeks ago, I felt this way last Wednesday, I feel this way now. This, by the way, in an age of the highest technology in medicine, where things can be measured so precisely, still, whom do they trust but the person with the disease, the person with the story? And the doctor comes back and tells the patient the story of his therapy. You'll feel this way Tuesday, and hopefully that way next Thursday, and then maybe there'll be a happy end to the story. In business, all business depends on stories. When somebody in any business, it doesn't make a difference if it's IBM or Snapple, says, we don't do things that way, unconsciously he is talking about the mythology of the business, meaning we've never done anything this way. It goes all the way back into the history of our business. This is the way it was done. And so it depends on the story. In politics, he who tells the best story wins. Not necessarily the nicest story or the story that leads to the kindest results, but the best story, the most appealing story at a particular time, and they vary widely. Pol Pot, FDR told the best stories for their time. One story deadly, and the other story quite the opposite. In religion, what do we call, by what phrase do we call the story of the Nativity? The greatest story ever told. The greatest story ever told. Not the greatest event that ever happened, but the greatest story ever told, because it just does so much more for the imagination. And it doesn't hold you to the facts. It's just the greatest story ever told. All of this story, all of this idea of story is part of our makeup. And then we come to us, the writers. And to the writers is entrusted the turning of the instinct of storytelling into an art. And so this little book, Unless Moves the Human Heart, is about that. The taking of that instinct of storytelling and applying certain parts, certain things that we do, that we might do, to make our art as lovely as possible. So I talk about the parts a bit in the book. I talk about Twain's famous statement that the difference between the word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. And I assure my students that we are only in the lightning business, that we have to be extremely precise about the words we choose. And in that precision, I advocate the choice of nouns. I drive my own students nuts about this. Well, I don't have to drive them very far, so you can take a look at them. The idea that the noun carries so much in it. If you need 3 adjectives to describe something, that you've probably chosen the wrong something. It is the noun that contains what Emerson called the speaking language of things. And if you hit that noun correctly, you really need very little else in writing. I asked them to choose anticipation over surprise. If you are looking at a piece of land, a place on the land where you know, over which you know the sun is going to rise, and you know the sun is going to rise, and instead the moon rises over that land, so what? It's a surprise. You shrug. But if you know that the sun is going to rise, and you know the sun is going to rise, and it does rise, then it's wonderful. Then you have that miracle, because you've built in your mind all the strength of your imagination. Why do we watch Hamlet over and over again? We know perfectly well from that first scene that Hamlet is going to buy it. So the question is how we get to that point, and from the beginning to the end comes the beauty and the power of the play. I asked people to choose imagination over invention. Flo characteristically hit on the most important thing I ever am able to say to people, and I didn't make it up. Shelley made it up. I just said it better than Shelley. We must learn to imagine what we know. Flo hit it, and she's just right on. We must learn to imagine what we know, meaning we know a great deal, we see a great deal, we live in the real world, and as writers, we just dream into things, and suddenly they change as a result of our being able to transform them by the strength and the power of our imagination. Invention is nothing. Invention is a camel who tap dances, speaks French, and is studying diplomacy. Anybody can make up something that's purely inventive. But a real camel, with those diva eyes and the strangeness of the face, and if you dream into that animal and see what really you have before you, apply the imagination, learn to imagine what you know, that is a work, that becomes a work of art. Anticipation over surprise, imagination over invention. Spill the beans. I ask my students to spill the beans. There is a great temptation on the part of young writers, new writers, to husband information with the idea that later on I'm going to tell them this momentous thing. That's bullshit 2 ways. One, nobody's really interested in the thing you're hiding. And 2, it's probably not that big anyway. But if you spill right away, and my colleagues and I know this, if you just get it out right away, then you get more beans. If you spill the beans, it's the only way to get more of them. And suddenly you find your mind catching up with something that's running ahead of it, like Alice's rabbit. And the thrill of writing is there. You're not hiding anything from anybody, including yourself. The thrill just comes to you. Reading, I'd like students to read a lot, but not too much. I find that if you are encouraging a superabundance of reading, you're squeezing something else out. You become too sophisticated. I mean, obviously this group doesn't have to worry about that. But quite seriously, I discourage a great deal of reading for its own sake because I don't want you to be burdened with it. If you are burdened with too much knowledge, you will not have ignorance. I know this sounds tautological, but it's useful to you as writers. Your ignorance is extremely useful to you because it opens the world to you. Everything then becomes something interesting. Every morning, when we awaken, we see something that is potentially wonderful, full of wonder. Form, I believe in form, particularly in poetry, not as to advocate always writing in the formal way, but just to test your strength within a sonnet, for example, where you have to do everything you're going to do in 14 lines. Richard Wilbur said, the strength of the genie comes from its being in a bottle. I believe in this. I believe that you can show remarkable things if you are held in place. Ergo, all the wonderful literature that comes out of prisons, where people feel the containment that they're in, and then let the wonderful flight of their minds take off. What else? Drafts. How many drafts should you do? Students will worry if they're doing 2 or 3 drafts. They shouldn't even start to worry until they're doing 9 or 10 or 15 or more. And this is an idiosyncrasy, but I encourage students to do a first draft in pen or pencil, so that when they cross out their mistakes, they can see their mistakes by the side of the road. Those first, there should be wreckage on the page. And you should see your pages like Dresden. They should look dreadful, etc. There's a strange liberating quality that goes with seeing that you were capable of just getting rid of all that crap and starting again and starting again. I tell my students that if a critic compliments them for a wonderful thing that they never intended, not to crack a smile and always to say, yes, thank you, I did mean it, and to take credit for every compliment you get. God knows you can get few enough of them. So that if somebody compliments you for something you had no intention of doing, you pretend, of course I meant that. I wanted to do it. Work, maybe work most of all. You have to want this. I don't have to preach to the choir here, but you do have to want it very, very much, because nobody in life is going to encourage you to do it, and you are the people on whom all of those who love stories depend. You are the chief storytellers. You are the ones turning an instinct into art. When I started teaching in my early 20s, I had students at Harvard whom I knew were going to be fine because they had both the talent and the energy. Frank Rich, Mark Halpern, I just stood back and cheered. But there was one young woman in the class, the daughter of a federal judge, who was better than those two and all the lot of them. But she just didn't want it. It was wonderful to watch what she could do, but she just thought of writing as something she did well, and there was no way I was going to persuade her otherwise. And I remember meeting her in a supermarket in Cambridge years later and said, did you ever keep up the writing? And without apology, she shook her head, no, not everybody wants to do this, but those who do are our crowd. Then it takes work, it takes effort, it takes a commitment to loneliness most of the time. One of the pleasures of teaching this program is that we are not lonely among one another, and that is not a real situation. That is not a situation that will follow you all your lives, but it's nice to have it for a couple of years. All the parts put together still require a reason. Why do you write? Why do you write? And at the end of this little book, I have a letter to my class. I say at the end of this thing, we have a party at Roberts at the end of the book. And Diana, where's that dreadful Diana anyway? She tells you to come to class and she doesn't show up to this. Diana, who, one of my bigger pains in the ass, but there's so many. And another first-rate writer, too. Looks up at me, sensing we are about to call it a night. Is there anything you haven't told us, she asks. Last chance. That's hard to imagine, says Suzanne to the others. You talk so much, yak, yak, yak. Well, there's something I might have mentioned, but it's difficult, so I didn't think you were up to understanding it. Anyway, it's too late now, I say. I get my coat and move toward the door, accompanied by a chorus of boos. We hug and we part. I decide to toss in my parting shot from long distance. And then I write this long letter with which I end the book, telling my students, in effect, to be useful in their writing, to be grand in their ambitions, ending it thus. You must write as if your reader needed you, because he does. If, as Kafka said, a book is an axe for the frozen sea within us, then write with that frozen sea in mind and in view. See your reader, who has fallen through the ice of his own manufacture. You can just make him out as he flails in slow motion, palms pressed upward under the ice. Here's your axe. Now chop away and lift him up by the shoulders. And what do you get out of this act of rescue? You save two people, your reader and yourself. Every life is exposed to things that will ruin it, and often do for a time. But there's another life inside us that remains invulnerable and glimpses immortality. For the writer, that life exists on the page, where it attaches itself to every other life, to all the lives that have been and will be. From time to time during the months we have been together, it may have seemed that I expected too much of you. In fact, I have expected too little. To be the writers you hope to be, you must surrender yourself to a kind of absurdity. You must function as a displaced person in an age that contradicts all that is brave, gentle, and worthwhile in you. Every writer has done this in every age. You must be of every age. You must believe in heroism and nobility just as strongly as you believe in pettiness and cowardice. You must learn to praise. For all its frailty and bitterness, the human heart is worthy of your love. Love it. Have faith in it. Both you and the human heart are full of sorrow, but only one of you can speak for that sorrow and ease its burdens and make it sing word after word after word. So ends this book, and I was going to end here. Hi, sweetie. Great writer you are. I was going to end here, but I was telling Melissa that this morning I asked Ginny if she thought it was a good idea if I read from this new book a bit. I tried it out on her, and so if you don't like this, she's sitting over there. I'll speak to her directly afterwards. Among many lovely words, quite undeserved, but nonetheless appreciated, that Flo hurled my way, was her description of making toast. And making toast, as some of you know, is my way of crawling out of the hole created by the death of our daughter in 2007. It was, we have been very happy to be of service to our grandchildren, Ginny and I, and to our son-in-law. We've been there 3 years, and we'll be there as long as it takes. That book, Making Toast, was my description of that life, really, with very little of me in it. Since I controlled the book, I didn't need much more to do, and I felt it was the right way to write that book. However, I was still, less so now, but I was still racked with a great deal of anguish and anger at the death of our daughter. So I wrote another book this past year, and it'll be out in this month, actually, in 2012. It's called Kayak Morning, and it simply is an account of my thoughts as I take my kayak out into the creeks around Quag. The way I've written it, it seems that it's all happening in a single morning, but it is not. It's a product of a lot of thoughts of several mornings, and it's written in sections or in movements. I tried to simulate the feeling of music in it. Sometimes the music is a dirge, and sometimes it is not. Sometimes it's funny. It moves around as one's feelings do when you're alone. So I thank you for being here tonight, and I'll read you a few pages of Kayak Morning. Cloud ghosts pass along the skull of the sky. 2 gulls wheel by together. A single-engine plane drones eastward, purposeful little bugger that makes a beeline. The sun is a blur, a slowing pulse. The water looks shellacked. I poke about at the shore where the creek has worn lines in the rocks. The rocks bear evidence of the creek. If the creek should dry up, the rocks would know it existed. The moon slides out of sight in its secret night. I am contained in my boat. Form rescues content. On December 8, 2007, our 38-year-old daughter Amy died of an undetected anomalous right coronary artery. 2.5 years later, I have taken up kayaking. They say that people in grief become more like themselves. I've always been a loner. Oh, sorry. When this happens in my class, as they know, I just talk and talk. So I'm just so relieved I am not having to talk to those people anymore, and I have somebody at the other end of the phone. They say that people in grief become more like themselves. I've always been a loner, so going out on a kayak suits my temperament. It also offers a solitude that is rare for me these days, because when Amy died, my wife Ginny and I moved into her house in Bethesda, Maryland, to help our son-in-law Harris care for their 3 small children, Jessica, Sammy, and James. We spend nearly all our time in Bethesda, but we have also kept our home in Quogue, a summer village on the south shore of Long Island. It is not far from Stony Brook University, where I teach English and writing. I commute between Bethesda and Quogue from September to June, and from June to September, I go kayaking. Our oldest son, Carl, and his wife Wendy also have 3 children, Andrew, Ryan, and Nate. The adults and the 6 children spend much of the summer together in Quogue, as we did when Amy was alive. When I am more sure of myself with my kayak, I will take the kids out with me one at a time, sitting them between my legs as I paddle. It would be cool to see the water from the water's point of view, says Sammy, a serious-minded child. Early in the morning, I go out by myself. It is Sunday, June 27th, 2010, just past dawn. My family is asleep, including our youngest son, John, who is visiting for the weekend. My boat scrapes on the public ramp. I dig my paddle into the pebbles in the shallow water and push off. Past a wooden dock jutting out into the creek and littered with parts of seashells strafed by gulls, smashed china on gray boards. Past the skeleton of a fish bobbing in the suds near a tuft of seagrass thick as a sheep's head. Past the orange buoy and the wet brown sand. A neap tide settles like a defeat. The sky is a blue stripe squeezed between 2 wide layers of white clouds. Over the canal it turns gunmetal gray. Elegies of water. Could rain. I try to be careful about kayaking. I bought a good sturdy boat, olive green. I got instructional books and took a couple of lessons. I learned to sit straight and to hold the paddle with my hands between its center and the blades. I bring a bottle of water if I'm to be out for a while. I spray on sunscreen. I wear my PFD, a life vest now called a personal flotation device. I rarely paddle farther than 90 feet from shore. Amy would have approved of such preparations and precautions. As a child, she would pore over toy instructions. As a wife and mother, she read booklets on household appliances from cover to cover. As a pediatrician, she was tirelessly careful with her research and with her patients. Until recently, I was never like that. I thought I could figure out everything as I went about it and simply plunged in. When I was 11, our 6th grade teacher, Miss Washburn, asked if anyone in the class played a musical instrument. She invited us to perform the following day. My Aunt Julia had just given me a guitar for my birthday on the day of Miss Washburn's invitation. So I decided to bring in my new guitar, even though I had not a single lesson in the instrument and had not even touched one until that day. The following morning, I stood in front of the class singing Red River Valley to the one major chord I figured out the night before. My classmates were shaking and screaming with laughter. I must have thought that playing the guitar would simply come to me, like a miracle. You can't always make your way in the world by moving up or down, for that matter. Boats move laterally on water, which levels everything. It is one of the 2 great levelers. Still water, dark waters, watercolors, waterproof, watermark, high watermark, water bird to be in hot water, brackish water, white water, water main, water lilies, waterfront, water cannon, water table, watershed, dead in water. The duck blind sits unmoving, a gray-brown shack. I've never seen it used. Retired hitman. It sits with straw popping out on all sides in the wrong places like old men's hair. 30 yards or so from the marshes and the shore on the east side of the creek. Above it rise trees of 100 greens, thick as privet hedges, bright green, purple green, green descending to black, pale green, nearly white. White oaks, willows, pitch pines, tupelo trees whose branches stick out at a 90-degree angle. One dead tree, the color of ashes, rises among them like a corkscrew. The trees are tall where the creek comes to a point and grow shorter and sparser where it widens at the canal. 3 or 4 solitary trees appear on the promontory at a distance from one another. One is flattened at the top like the desert date trees I saw in Sudan in 1992 when I was writing a story on the lost boys for Vanity Fair. Half hidden in the foliage are houses, summer places, most of them sprawling with additions. One of the larger houses is a flagpole on its lawn. I read The Wind by the American flag flapping and clanking against the pole. Big houses, substantial houses, and confident houses. The creek rolls to them and away. Elsewhere, great herds of bathers soon will gallop on the nearby ocean beach, calling out to one another in loud patrician voices and complaining about a slice of swordfish scorched on the grill last night. They will organize their lives into committees under yellow and white beach umbrellas while the sea rears up against its rains. On the creek, I am the crowd, I and the birds and the insects and the fish. Beneath me lie the Gothic rocks in their dark museums. The minnows move in fits and starts. The banded killifish explode upwards like sparks from a bonfire in the evening. Powerboats ride at anchor on the west side of the creek, halfway between the canal and the public ramp. They belong to members of the Shinnecock Yacht Club, founded in 1887, merely a smallish house and a dock with a few slips. There are 9 boats anchored in the creek today. None is oversized or showy, thus all are showy in the way of quag, which often makes a vice of modesty. The boats are still, as are the egrets that congregate on the dock. The egrets stand together, but seem not to acknowledge one another. It's difficult to determine their policy. On the rocks above the public ramp, a rust-brown dinghy lies upside down, looking like a sea lion lolling in the sun. Nearby, a bush presents a small bouquet of pink and violet flowers. J.M. Singh had a phrase for such a picture, the splendid desolation of decay. The pilings of the various docks stick up like periscopes. The sky has turned gray and white clouds rising into the gray. The moon leaves a trace as a chalky eye. White the pebbles, white the tips of the waves, white the weeds, birds wheeling in the wind, the squeak of gulls. It colors everything I do, I said. What did you expect, said my friend. I'm in a box. Isn't that what grief is? You're the professional, you tell me. What do you want? She said. I want out. What do you really want? I want her back. Well, she said, you'll have to find a way to get her back. Objects I never intended to see take on disproportionate significance. The gull's stone eye, the heron's wobbly legs, a jellyfish suspended like an open parachute just below the surface of the water, the red veins in the chute. A tassel of seaweed attached to a log, and the log itself, blackened, drifting toward my kayak. It looks like a swimming dog. I cannot tell if I am seeing the whole thing or a portion of it. I wallop the waves, the log creates a weir. I swerve in one direction, the log swerves in another as if it were steering intentionally. See? It edits itself. The creek is a palimpsest, lined with corrections. Kayaking is like writing, requiring the same precision and restraint. You are definite, stabbing the paddle blades into the water. Wild swings will get you nowhere. Writing requires generosity towards every point of view. Kayaking insists on all points of view. The water's point of view, as Sammy observed. and that of the birds and of the sky, and of the algae and of the insects. Writing is for important things, matters of substance. There is no point in going out in a kayak unless you feel the potential profundity of the act, the adventure that opens before you. You are alone and not alone. No one writes alone. Write, and you are in the company of all who have written before you. No one paddles alone. And so this little book goes on, sections as I've read to you, shifting movements and shifting language, some observations, some memories, some conversations, some little stories, definitions. I define things as I go along, just to give a break of the tone. And eventually at the end I tire of my own anguish and I settle on love. So here's how this ends. That's how the whole book ends. Drifting again, I look down into the water of my birth, of our birth, the fluid in our bodies, the salt in our blood. A white gull poses on the dock of the yacht club, fresh as a girl. A blue claw crab settles on a stone at the base of the dock. He is done with prowling for a while. A dubious duck treads on a gray slab on the shore above, its brown and gray down lifted by a breeze. A dragonfly threads a course among the reeds. My hands close on the air in an unconscious prayer. In every heartbreak, beauty intrudes. I am willing to be taken. The wind touches my wrists. I hear the caterwauling of the crows. I taste and smell the clammy air. I see everything. Art does not make up a life. Experience does not make up a life. And death does not make up a life either. I don't see why eternity has to last forever. Those whom I have loved and who have loved me, no matter what happened to dilute that love or to cool it or even to drown it, I should like to gather them all on that far shore and thank them. They were my life. Love conquers death. No celestial jury will bring Amy back to me. I will not see her either, no matter how others may want me to. She will not talk to me. But in the time since she died, I have been aware every minute of my love for her. She lives in my love. This morning when I climbed into my kayak and headed out, I knew I would be going nowhere, as I've been going nowhere for the past 2.5 years. But my love for my daughter makes somewhere out of nowhere. In this boat, on this creek, I am moving forward, even if I am moving in circles. Amy returns in my love, alive and beautiful. I have her still. Grief, the state of mind brought about when love, having lost to death, learns to breathe beside it. See also love. I aim my boat toward the shore. Thank you for listening.
Would you like to answer some questions?
Sure. Just keep them easy and no math.
That was wonderful. Any questions? Everyone's spent.
Sure.
This book, and we saw your interview on PBS, but unless it moves the human heart, you know, if you're really tapping into this, you know, this is really almost like a zeitgeist about, you know, people needing to express themselves in the culture right now. What do you think that's all about? Is it just we've always had a need to tell stories, or is there something
Both.
about? Yeah.
Both. It's a question that's perplexed me as well. I don't know if anybody else saw that interview, but at the end of it, I wasn't alert, and Jeff Brown, who was doing the interview, said, "And Roger, would you care to answer some questions if they come over the internet?" Right. And I, stupid, because I'm on television and scared, I go, "Yeah, sure." Well, 600 questions came in the first 2 days, and they're still coming in. And I'm becoming, I said I'd be becoming the Dr. Phil of writing. And Ginny said, with your personality, it's more like the Dr. Pill of writing, which seems not necessarily cruel. I think there has always been this desire to express themselves. Remember, we're talking at 2 levels here. You get, everybody tells you, and you're going to suffer this as writers. All of you, I know, Luann, Melissa, every writer in this room, professional writers in this room, and all of you who will be, if you're not yet, people are going to not just, they'll throw manuscripts at you out of moving taxis and say, would you mind reading this? And you'd be 500 pages and they'll hit you in the head. People who would not behave this way to dentists, not behave to lawyers, I mean, any else, behave, we somehow, by what we do, we announce that we're available for abuse. And you're going to get it. There's no denying it. But they're not writers, most of them. They just want to write, and it's touching, and and you find kind ways to tell them. The writers, the people in this room doing it now, interest me a great deal and move me a great deal, because we are denizens of a money-driven age like I've never seen in my life, and I've lived a long life now. I knew this was going to happen in 1980 when the phrase "bottom line" came into the culture, and now everything is driven by that. In this crummy, stupid way of living a life, all you beautiful people thrive. No one has ever said to me, I do it as a protest against the age. Nobody had ever sat like a horse's ass that way. But I can't help thinking that in some unconscious way, it is just to say, well, if we're all broke, why can't I do what I want to do? And it's worthwhile, and I have the ability to do it. So with those 600 questions, I did break them down into categories. I mean, the irony is, as most of you know, is I don't use a computer, and I don't give a flying fuck about email or any of this other stuff, Twittering and tweeting, whatever. I just, with my typewriter, typed out the categories and sent them back of answers. But the interest in writing now is overwhelming, and it actually places a much greater burden on us who can do it to do it well, because it isn't just putting words on a screen or anything. It's not just texting, and it's not typing it up. It is, as you very well know, an art that's a very precious art by which we not only try to live ourselves, but to help others live. It's a responsibility. Yes, Jen.
You have taught for so many years, as you said.
There's no need for that, Jen.
Way back to Frank Rich. How has your approach changed in the classroom? Are you just
I didn't
the
learn
same
to do,
as-
I think I do it fairly well now. I promise you I did not do this well until the last 10, maybe 15 years. For one thing, I was so self-absorbed. Now I just hate everybody, myself included. But ambition gets in the way of real teaching a lot of the times, because you're just thinking, what am I doing here in this? Why am I wasting my time with these jerks when I should be out, doing this myself? You don't say that as harshly as that. I say it as harshly as that. But Melissa and Luann would say it as harshly as that. But it's all the selfishness that goes with being young. I started teaching when I was 22. Why was I teaching people at the age of 20? I had absolutely nothing to teach them. And then, little by little, I started to unconsciously acquire some information about what I was doing myself, what I was observing in my fellow writers whom I admire. And they started to become a body of knowledge that I could share. And the impulse to share it was the change. I realized that the writing being such a self-interested enterprise, that you are alone most of the time. You are interested only in your advancement on the word of the page. I mean, it's very, very small. That a classroom is the one time you can actually do something for somebody. And when you realize that that's an important part of life, if not the most important part of life, and you give yourself to your students and wish them well. I mean, one of the things that all the teachers in our department do is wish every student well, and try our best to make sure that all their ambitions are realized. Then you start to become a good teacher. It's not a matter of knowledge, and it's not a matter of tricks. It's really a matter of attitude. And so I think it's, it happened to me only recently. Just think of how many classrooms are littered with those I mistaught, But now I'm getting the hang of it, so I can actually see the difference. Stan?
Did you know that you were going to write Unless It Moves the Human Heart about that particular class before you taught it? And if so...
No,
okay.
not a bit, no. That came about in a weird way. There was a panel at the Museum of the City of New York celebrating the 50th anniversary of Strunk and White's Elements of Style. And they asked me to serve on the panel. Every other writer I know loves Strunk and White and swears by it. I had never read it. So, of course, with typical, this is the kind of student I was anyway. So that morning, I read it, the morning of the panel. And frankly, I found it kind of average. You know, it's good for adequate writing, but it's not good for the kind of writing that you do and the kind of writing that we encourage here. It's just, it's got kind of a safety net for mistakes. And I said as much on the panel, but I tried to, temper my remarks because everybody else was saying how much it meant to them. I didn't want to, by my dismissal, insult them. The publisher came up to me afterwards and said, would you write the next Elements of Style? And I said, I really don't do that, that kind of stuff. But then I went back, and I don't work for another publisher anyway. I found one stupid publisher, and I'm staying with him. He's stuck with each other. Then I thought, well, I have done this a while, and I have some things to say, and how to tell the story. And then it just came in a second. I said, I never could write a how-to book, but I could write a story of a class. And so I wrote the story of our class. Of course, I made them sound a lot funnier and brighter than they are. But who couldn't do that, really? Yes?
I like what you say about a book needing to be useful, and I was just wondering if there was a book in your life that you found to be the most useful.
Most useful?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have, there are different aspects of use. There's aesthetic use, philosophical use, moral use. Books tend to be useful in one or another specific category. I like everything of Graham Greene, mainly because of his tortured moral sense. He is always trying to find some reason for God. And I attach myself to that. I think that force that drives him to do that expands or ramifies to questions of justice and decency and all other things. But I think it's basically to try to believe in God, much less a beneficent God. So probably anything of Greene's, Power and Glory, and so forth. And then there are others for quite different reasons. The overwhelming intelligence of George Eliot. I can't read a paragraph of George Eliot without being floored by something so amazingly smart that just occurs to her in a clause. And then the precision of Conrad, too. All of these things I find useful, but these are sort of practical uses. But the moral use, which is I think what you meant, that would be Greene. Thank you very much.
I was listening to you, Roger, and I've decided you're the champion of mixing daring to think about the sacred while dabbling easily in the profane. Like you really keep the two things.
I don't dabble in the profane. I follow it.
Thank you all for coming. There's cheese cubes and fruit and beverages in the back, and also books for Roger to sign.
Thank you, Magdalene.